Hi, my name is Danielle Cooper, and I'm a senior studying business management and leadership at UNSW. And one of the questions that I have is, has there ever been a time where you felt conflicted or even convicted about something that you had to teach? And how has your faith grown at a secular university rather than a Christian-based university? So yeah, those are my questions.
Hey everybody, welcome to Meet the Prof. I am Shane Hartley. My friend Spence Hackney and I have been receiving questions from college students, and then we ask them to Christian professors. And our mission is really simple. We want to encourage Christ-centered conversations on the college campus. So Spence and I interviewed Dr. Len Lecci, who's a professor of psychology at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Part of his research involves detection of early memory loss. Another part of his research involves looking at the bias that's involved in different jury decisions. And I think you're going to enjoy hearing some of his story about how God has worked in his life. And I think you're going to enjoy hearing about the role of doubt in having healthy growth. Also about dating. He talks about building trust in dating relationships. Please remember to click on to subscribe or follow this podcast, and that helps get the word out to even more college students. And so without any further ado, enjoy our conversation with Dr. Len Lecci. You know, Len, you have had some students come to your office. I'd love you to, if you can share any without sharing names. You know, one of the things we're hopeful for with the podcast is that this will really encourage Christ-centered conversations between students and professors. And since you put your profile on meettheprof.com, I know there's been some students who have come to you about that. Can you share about any example of that?
Yeah, sure. So it has happened over the semesters where, someone might come in and identify themselves as Christian or maybe even say something like they read that profile. And so that's always a great way for them to start the conversation. I think I've mentioned it, to you, and I know I've mentioned it when I've spoken to student groups before, is while at a secular university, there are certainly some guidelines, very clear guidelines on what a professor can and cannot say to their students. And for obvious reasons, there's a power dynamic and such. But those restrictions are completely irrelevant for students. When students initiate the conversation, then it actually makes it very easy to talk about those things if they initiate it. So that's absolutely something, would encourage students that if they want to have those conversations, that something they should feel comfortable doing. There are absolutely no sanctions to it, and they might be surprised that someone might reciprocate that otherwise would not be able to say some things. Obviously, as we if we start talking about this topic, the student may be further ahead than I am. I don't know anything about where they are, and I certainly wouldn't assume that my area of expertise generalizes to that. And in many respects, I'm sure the faith walks of the student and the professor are very similar, involve a lot of the same issues. So in a sense, you can have a conversation that's a lot more like a companion conversation as opposed to, this topic on which you're taking the class from me and I've developed some expertise in. So, it's a different and neat experience to have that interaction as well.
Well, one of our favorite things is actually receiving questions from the students that want to ask Christian professors questions. So take a listen to this question.
Hi, my name is Danielle Cooper, and I'm a senior studying business management and leadership at UNSW. And one of the questions that I have is, has there ever been a time where you felt conflicted or even convicted about something that you had to teach? And how has your faith grown at a secular university rather than a Christian-based university?
Thank you, Danielle. Great questions. So the first one, have I ever felt sort of convicted or in some way maybe even restricted in some of the material? It's one thing that's interesting about academic freedom is while there is this sort of broad coverage that is needed in certain areas, you actually have a fair amount of flexibility in how you cover topics. And I've found over the years I've been able to work in some ideas that allow me to teach in a way that's closer to or better reflects my faith. I don't think I did that very well early on, which is probably a combination of experience and or lack thereof at the time, and even self-confidence in your profession. And then of course there's always the moving from untenured to tenured is always a part of that. I think as over the years in teaching, I've kind of felt myself stepping out a little more and sharing a little more, doing things like Meet the Prof, were all sort of faith steps for me. To recognize that it wasn't that big of a deal to put that information out there. I will say I still am, soft pedal it. I'm absolutely not, coming out and beating kids over the head with anything at all. But I will say there's a lot of faith-informed information in the lectures, some of which, I don't know if I'd use the word coded, but certainly some students might kind of hear words that would resonate with them if they are believers. If they're not, I don't think it'd necessarily even be on their radar, but it would still raise some of those issues. I'll give you an example. I usually note when we talk about one of the theorists in the humanistic existential movement, Carl Rogers, who's pretty widely known and discussed. A lot of people don't know he was a pastor, and his theories are, very much in line with his pastoral background. His primary intervention is to make sure people feel loved and accepted, which is sort of very basis of what one of the main messages of the Bible. God is love, So certainly a lot of elements in there, and pointing out where it's coming from him. He's usually one of the most liked psychologists when they do those. Whoops, I'm sorry. See, that's what happens when you have motion lights and you don't move for a while.
You're not moving enough.
Not moving enough. I'll start dancing. But usually when they'll do they'll have like maybe a client, and they'll have different perspectives work with, and they'll have famous psychologists. And there's a video of Rogers and a couple other big names in the field, and pretty universally, everybody's very favorable reaction to Rogers. A very likable guy, makes you feel loved and accepted, and so that's a very universal reaction to him, and that that element, where it comes from, how it sort of has this meets a fundamental human need that is really given by God. That making that connection a little more explicit. Just kind of one example of that. I think I have some other places where people misquote the Bible and turn it into some hate messages and sort of highlight. I think someone's holding a sign referring to Romans, particular chapter in Romans, and so we'll often read that passage and sort of say, clearly it's not saying what it says on that sign. So there's kind of little ways you can do that are still meeting the academic mission, but allows you to do a little forays into those areas. So all that to say, not necessarily felt constrained, though obviously if it being a secular university, if someone describes a problem, one wouldn't necessarily in an open classroom say, well, let's pray for John who's having this difficulty. That might be something you might do in an office if it was just him. But I think there's some ways in which being at the university has facilitated that. Certainly meeting with other professors on campus. There's a pretty strong and vibrant Christian community on campus. Being able to meet with other members of faculty, staff, even students who have those beliefs is always helpful. It's always encouraging. We are in fact encouraged to meet with other members of the body. I've enjoyed the opportunities to speak to student Christian organizations over the years. So I think those types of events, particularly when every now and then you kind of have to put yourself out there. I mean, obviously a podcast, the Meet the Prof. One of the other things that stands out is when we've done the Easter message back in the, especially when we used to have that hard copy of the Seahawk newspaper where it lists the faculty and staff who identify themselves as Christian. So I think all of those are, important steps in your faith walk because they force you to go a little further. They force you to walk. They force you to take another step. And that's needed if you're going to continue to develop.
That's a principle that's been true in my own life, in the Christian life, that sometimes the greatest growth has come whenever I've taken some kind of step of faith.
Yeah, and I think half the battle is just the decision to do it and to go through with it, not necessarily anything specific that comes from it. Because, most of the time I don't think we know what comes from, you put a podcast out into the ether. Who knows, who's going to listen to it.
Listen to it.
Yeah, Mom.
We've got one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suggest no one's listening to it. The point being, I won't know who's listening to it. And so whatever impact it has is something I'm unlikely to actually get feedback on. But that's okay. I mean, you have to have some faith that it will serve some purpose for at least someone, hopefully more than one.
Hey, it just occurred to me that you probably have students coming to you for free therapy. You can just go to the psych professor and you don't have to pay him an hourly rate.
Does that happen?
Yeah,
Does that happen?
That can happen. We do have some guardrails around that, just in the sense there's obvious, liability issues and such in that. Yeah. But I mean, you can always lend an ear and encouragement. Though if it starts to evolve to those things, one of the things we do redirect them to the resources on campus where that's the person's job to do that.
Well, here's my other PSA. If somebody doesn't want to go to their professor, they could buy me a cheeseburger and a Coke, and I'll provide 30 minutes of free therapy.
There you go.
For anybody who buys me
worse
lunch.
than they came in.
How about that? Yeah, and I can mess them up really good, and then send them to somebody to actually pay the bills.
Well, cheeseburger and a drink is a pretty good rate. So I think
I'm just saying, I'm a cheap date. I really am. I don't even eat fancy.
Well, how about we head into the lightning round? This is where we ask you some quick questions just for the first answers that come to your mind. So you ready?
Okay. Sure.
All right. So what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
I've always thought that was kind of a funny question because, you always think, you look back, I know this is lightning round, I'll keep it brief, but you always look back and say, well, then if I should tell myself this and not do X or Y. But I really think most of those experiences, I think I wouldn't say anything to my 18-year-old self, is I wouldn't want to mess it up.
I've never heard that answer.
I don't think I would want to mess it up. All of the experiences, good and bad, I think are so critical into getting you to where you are. That not that you'd want to do some of those negative experiences, but at the same time, you kind of look back on them and see that, they were important, and as painful as they might have been, I think I'm not sure I would say anything.
That's actually the best answer we've heard to that question.
Of course,
I'm going with
it
this.
Come from you, Len.
I'm going to change that. Take off those bell-bottom flare pants.
All right. So here's mine. What advice would you give a graduating senior?
A lot of times we think about the transition from college to non-college life as being a really big change. And the reality is, I think if students do college right and well, that it really doesn't have to be a big change. Their life does not have to be this, huge right or left turn. I think especially if they've had a successful college time, is to take what they've learned, basically just continue that path. You'll be in a new location, but that many of the same practices you did, the things that you did that were helpful to you, that helped you grow closer to God, the things that you did that helped you grow as an individual, to just keep on doing those things and, even continue.
Well, Len, what advice would you give to other Christian professors?
I think one of the most comforting thing I've gotten from other Christian professors, and so I'll sort of pay it forward, if you will, is that there are a lot of Christian professors out there. Oftentimes, many of them, the majority, I think, are probably less comfortable expressing that their Christianity and their beliefs. So it may seem as though there are fewer than there are. Certainly individuals who might have contrarian views, atheists or agnostics, they might not have any problem expressing that, in part, of course, because there wouldn't be any sanctions governing that they have no belief on a topic. Just like I could say, I have no political interests or affiliation. Well, you can say that. What I can't say, of course, is if I do or it's aligned in this manner. So, but I think that sometimes leads to the misperception that the people who aren't speaking don't have those views, and often, and that they may not even have very strong views about those things. So, I guess the advice I would give is that there's a lot of Christian faculty out there, a lot of strong believers, and to look for ways to connect with them, which there's plenty of them on campus, probably on any campus. And it's, I think it's great for you and it's great for them, as you connect with other believers in that setting.
Yeah. What's the primary piece of advice you would give the parents of college students?
That's a really particularly poignant question, because in interacting with some of my friends, many of my friends who have kids who are in college now, and one of probably the most common thing I hear is essentially the belief that the students are at school and it's not just secular, but even hostile to Christianity. I don't think that's the case at all. I know that is a common perception in the public, but I don't think that's the case at all. And so in some respects for parents, to have some confidence that their son or daughter is not necessarily in some extraordinarily hostile environment, if they haven't been looking for those connections in the same way that I mentioned it for my colleagues, they're there for the students, probably more so really for the students. My guess is if they went and asked 5 of their professors about their beliefs, probably a couple of them would tell them, "Oh yeah, I'm a believer," and so that they might get that, that they get a clear perception. It won't be 100%, absolutely not, but there'll be quite a few there, and again, I think for parents to have some faith that their child, adult child that's going through this process, really it will make them a better student. It'll make them a better person. Can make them even draw closer to God. And there's a lot that's in their hands that they can control to have those kinds of interactions and open their eyes to those opportunities. So, have some faith in the process in that respect, to not necessarily be fearful of that.
Yeah. Well, Len, I'm so grateful for this time with you, and so grateful for you being there on campus. Did you have another thought?
No, I was just going to say I've enjoyed chatting with both of you. Thank you so much for asking me to do this and helping me continue my faith journey as well.
Well, it's such a joy to get to spend time with you and to know that you care so much for these students. And so when students want to learn more about you, of course, they can go to meettheprof.com. But where else can they follow you or learn about you?
Of course, I have an email, last name, first initial at uncw.edu. And so students can certainly reach out that way. I'm in office hours as they're each week. And of course, I think some of that information is on Meet the Prof as well. So that's probably the best way to do it. I'm not on Twitter. I don't do any of those things, or X or whatever we're calling it these days. So unfortunately, I'm limited in that access, but you can always come knock on the door.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview, and you can learn more as well as read about other Christian professors on our website, meettheprof.com. And college students, if you would like to ask a question to a professor and potentially be on the show, this is how you do it. Follow us on Instagram. It's Meet the Prof Official. And then upload us a video by direct message where you say your name, your college campus, and what year you are, and then ask your question. And you can ask more than one question, and hopefully then you can be featured on the show. And if you enjoyed this, would you please share this episode with a friend, someone you think it would be helpful to? And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast. And lastly, if you would like to financially support our Faculty Commons ministry with Cru, you can do so online by going to give.cru.org/0424344. So thank you for being with us. And until next time, we hope you feel encouraged to have a Christ-centered conversation on your college campus.